welcome back to the deep dive. You know how it is, some books everyone's always talking about reading? Well, we cut to the chase for you and pull out all the most interesting bits. It's like getting the wisdom of a whole book without weeks of reading. And today we're diving into How to Read a Book, a classic by Mortimer J. Adler and Charles Van Doren.
Oh, a fantastic choice.
It's practically a masterclass in reading smarter,
Yeah.
not just harder.
That's it.
We could all use a little more of that, right?
Absolutely. Anyone who feels like they're not getting the most out of their reading should check this out. Or if you're just intimidated by those really dense, challenging books.
Totally. It's like they say there's a difference between reading and, like, really reading.
Huge difference.
How to read a book
Yeah.
helps you bridge that gap. But one of the things that really struck me right off the bat is the idea that even after years of school, most of us haven't been taught how to truly read at an advanced level.
It's a bit of a shock, isn't it?
It is. Did you know there were actually 4 levels of reading?
Yeah. Adler and Van Doren break those down for us, from elementary reading, just, understanding the words on the page, all the way to synoptical reading, which is about bringing together information from multiple sources.
And most of us haven't even touched those higher levels.
Hmm.
That's mind-blowing. We spent all this time learning to read, but no one tells us there's, like, a whole other level out there.
A whole other world.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the things they really hit on is the importance of understanding how an author uses key terms. They call it coming to terms with the author.
Yeah. It's fascinating because it forces you to slow down and really look at the language. Words can have different meanings depending on the context, and understanding that is key to really getting what the author's trying to say.
Okay, so can you give us an example? Like, what kind of mistakes can we make if we don't pay attention to those subtle shifts in meaning?
They have this great example about buttons and buttonholes. It sounds so basic, but they use it to show how easily our assumptions about what words mean can trip us up.
It's such a good illustration. We think we understand what's being said, but then we miss these really important nuances. It's kind of like how we can totally misinterpret text messages sometimes.
Exactly. And it highlights something really crucial. Effective reading isn't about speed. It's about really understanding. It's about actively engaging with the text, not just skimming it.
Not just going through the motion.
No. Another thing they bring up is how you have to approach different types of books in different ways. A cookbook, for instance, needs a totally different strategy than a philosophy book,
Right. So you can't have this one-size-fits-all approach to every book you pick up. You've got to adapt your reading strategy based on the book and what you want to get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the categories they lay out?
They cover a wide range. Practical books, imaginative literature, history, science, philosophy, you name it. And for each one, they have specific tips and techniques.
Okay, so let's say someone's listening and thinking, okay, this is interesting, but I don't have time to read a whole book on how to read. What would you say is the most important takeaway so far? What's the one thing they should start doing differently, like today, to improve their reading?
I'd say the biggest thing is to be an active reader. Don't just passively take in the words. Engage with the text. Question the author's assumptions. Connect the ideas to your own life and what you already know. And pay attention to the language. Those little shifts in meaning can make a huge difference.
I love that. Be an active participant in the conversation the author's trying to have with you.
And speaking of conversations, let's talk about this concept from the book that I find really relevant, especially now with all the information overload. Synoptical reading.
Ah, yes. Synoptical reading. Synoptical reading. It's about becoming your own expert on a topic by reading, multiple books on that same subject. So instead of just getting one person's point of view, you're getting a whole bunch of different voices.
So it's not just reading more, it's reading smartly.
What's the strategy here? How do we avoid just drowning in a sea of information?
Well, Adler and Van Doren give us this really handy roadmap for it. First, you pick your topic, and you come up with some specific questions that you want answers to.
So no more just wandering aimlessly in the library, huh? We need a mission.
Exactly. Have a purpose.
Okay, so let's say I'm super into artificial intelligence. I mean, it's a pretty hot topic these days.
It is.
What kind of questions would I start with there?
Well, you might ask things like, what are the different types of AI? Or what are the ethical considerations? Or maybe even, how might AI change the job market in the next 10 years? Stuff like that.
That makes sense. It's like having a filter for all that information out there. Okay, but even with a filter, how do we keep track of all these different books and all their arguments?
Well, they really stress the importance of taking good notes as you read. Summarize the main points, highlight key passages, and make sure you're using a consistent format. That way, you can easily compare and contrast all those different views.
So it's like building your own personal encyclopedia on that topic. You're curating all the best insights from these different experts.
Right, and once you've done that groundwork, you can start to see the bigger picture. You can spot where those authors agree, where they disagree, see if there are any holes in their arguments, and ultimately you can form your own conclusions.
It really does feel like you're taking your thinking to the next level. You're not just absorbing the information, you're processing it, analyzing it, and creating something new.
Absolutely. That's the power of synoptical reading. It turns you from a passive consumer of information into an active creator of knowledge.
I love how that ties back to this idea that we're not just learning about a book called How to Read a Book.
Right.
We're actually learning how to apply these techniques to any subject we're interested in. It's about becoming a more effective learner, period.
I agree. And to give you a good example of how it works in practice, Adler and Doren walk us through a synoptical reading exercise using the idea of progress. They suggest tackling works by, authors like Locke, Kant, and Mill. And each of them had a very different perspective on what progress is and how it works.
So instead of getting bogged down in the details of just one author's view, we're getting this, multi-dimensional view of the topic.
Exactly.
That sounds really interesting, but maybe a bit daunting, too. I mean, what if some of these texts are really dense and difficult? How do we even begin to approach them?
Well, that's where those earlier techniques we talked about come in handy. Remember coming to terms with the author. Understanding how they define their key terms is absolutely crucial for unlocking the meaning of their arguments. Plus, they have specific advice on how to tackle those tough texts. Breaking them down into smaller chunks, rereading passages, maybe even reading summaries or commentaries alongside the original work.
So it's like they've anticipated all the things that could trip us up, and they've given us the tools to deal with them.
I like that. Going back to this example of progress, though, what kind of insights might we get from comparing and contrasting these different views on it? Well, let's start with Locke. He was a big champion of the Enlightenment and saw progress as being very closely tied to individual liberty and the expansion of knowledge. To him, a society that encourages free thinking and expression is bound to progress.
That makes sense.
Kant, though, he put more emphasis on our moral and intellectual capacities. He believed that progress is all about refining our thinking and becoming more rational beings.
So for Locke, it's about outward advancement. But for Kant, it's more about this inward transformation.
Yes. That's a really good way of putting it.
That's a fascinating contrast.
And then you have Mill, who brings this more nuanced perspective.
Okay.
He recognizes that societal progress isn't always this straight line upwards, There can be setbacks, compromises, unintended consequences. He really wants us to consider the complexities of progress and the potential downsides.
So by bringing together these different threads of thought, we end up with a much richer and more realistic understanding of what progress really is.
Exactly. Synoptical reading isn't about finding the one right answer. It's about embracing the complexity of the world and developing your own informed perspective on things.
It's about moving past those overly simple explanations and becoming more critical, more nuanced thinkers. It sounds like a really powerful tool for navigating a world that's only getting more complex and more overloaded with information. It's really striking me how relevant all this is, even though the book was written decades ago. I mean, we're dealing with way more information overload now than they ever did back then.
Yeah, definitely. With endless articles and social media and online courses, the ability to really read deeply and critically is more important than ever.
It's not just about keeping up with the trends. It's about being able to cut through all the noise and find the truly valuable stuff.
Exactly. And How to Read a Book really gives us the framework for that. It's about becoming more discerning, not just passively taking in everything that's thrown at us.
That's what we're all about here on the Deep Dive too, right? Helping you cut through the clutter and get to the heart of what matters.
That's it. We do the hard work so you can just focus on those light bulb moments and figure out how to apply those insights to your own life.
So if you're liking this deep dive and you're ready to, really unlock your full reading potential, I highly recommend checking out How to Read a Book by Mortimer J. Adler and Charles Van Doren.
Yeah, it's a book that can really change how you think and learn. And don't forget, the techniques we talked about today, they can be applied to any subject you're into.
Absolutely. Whether you're digging into history, science, philosophy, or even just trying to understand the news better, these strategies can help you become a more active, engaged, and insightful reader.
Reading doesn't have to be a chore. It can be a journey, a way to expand your horizons and really grow as a person.
I love that. And if you're hungry for more deep dives into all sorts of fascinating topics, hit that subscribe button and join our community of fellow knowledge seekers.
We put out new episodes every week exploring everything from the latest scientific discoveries to, those big philosophical questions that have been around forever.
And hey, while you're at it, if you enjoyed this episode, hit that like button and leave a comment below telling us your biggest takeaway.
Yeah.
We love hearing what resonates with you.
Until next time, happy reading.